The East India Company's dominance of the Indian subcontinent's trade, commerce, politics, and administrative landscape is fairly well chronicled. Armed with a monopoly granted by Queen Elizabeth I and capital raised from a large pool of investors, each with limited liability, and staffed by cunning and mostly unscrupulous officers, the East India Company leveraged unique circumstances prevailing on the Indian subcontinent to not only become the largest corporation in the world, but also a nation-state exercising political, military, and administrative control over large parts of the Indian subcontinent. While a number of modern corporations can boast of similar financial success, there is virtually no modern-day successor to this unique part trading organization, part nation-state that changed forever the political destiny of the subcontinent and spawned the global trade-fueled consumer culture that continues to dominate our lives every day. With so much of the discourse focused on the East India Company, one can be forgiven to think that this was some form of a solo performance. In reality, the East India Company collaborated and partnered with a lot of actors. Yet, we know very little about the other actors and how they fared. In this series, we will uncover interesting tidbits from the 18th and 19th century corporate India. Let's dive into a quick overview. The company used banks and other financial institutions to facilitate trade and commerce. Interestingly, modern banking behemoths, Standard Chartered Bank, which started its life as the Chartered Bank of India, Australia and China, as well as the State Bank of India, which started as the Bank of Bengal, Bank of Bombay and Bank of Madras, owe their existence to the company and its business. The company collaborated with local Indian merchants and agents to facilitate trade, procure goods, and navigate the complexities of local markets. It also collaborated with various British and European trading houses for the procurement and exchange of goods, including the import of Indian textiles and spices. The company frequently collaborated with various shipping and trading companies to transport goods and materials. Companies like Jardine Matheson & Co. and P&O, which continue to exist to this very day, had contracts with the company to transport goods, mail and people back in the 19th century. And they were by no means the only private enterprises that benefited from lucrative partnerships with the company. The foundations of the modern Indian railway network are also found in the company's 19th century collaborations with the likes of the Great Indian Peninsular Railway and the Bengal Nagpur Railway Company. The company had a keen interest in developing railways and indeed inland water transport to support trade and administrative functions. And these companies were instrumental in building and managing the early railway infrastructure in India. These alliances and partnerships were not limited to trade and infrastructure. The company, after all, was a violent force intent on establishing its dominance in the region. And so the East India Company had alliances with various military contractors and mercenary groups, utilizing their services for protection, logistics, and military operations in India and the neighboring regions. During times of conflict, companies that supplied arms, ammunition, and military equipment often collaborated with the East India Company to support its forces in India. Similarly, the British Royal Navy often collaborated with the company to provide naval support and enforce British naval supremacy in the Indian Ocean region. Any account of the East India Company would be incomplete without a mention of opium. The East India Company was heavily involved in the opium trade during the 19th century. While it was not a specific company, but various opium traders and merchants often collaborated with the East India Company to cultivate and trade opium in India, particularly in regions like Bengal and Bihar. I hope you enjoyed the sneak peek into the world of East India Company, and more critically, its partners and allies. In the next few episodes, we'll explore the economic, political, and infrastructural landscape that greeted the company upon its arrival in India. We'll also dive into interesting historical facets of the corporations and players that actually outlived the East India Company, and in some cases remain significant players in the 21st century. A company is nothing without its people, and in these times of profound changes in corporate culture, it would be interesting to look back at 19th century culture in arguably one of the most disruptive and innovative companies of all times. Please join me in this interesting journey and support my efforts by liking, sharing, and subscribing to this channel.